Podcasters Roundtable, round 80, putting together a podcast studio. Yeah. A little rock and roll. Look at that. We've made Dave play the guitar. We got our special guest, a new roundtabler, rocking on the drums. I saw the drums in the background of his podcast studio. I'm going to assume. We'll find out. So we had to open like that. That was amazing. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
All right. Well, tonight, we did this before. First of all, if you're wondering, yes, it looks different. And I'm not holding the microphone. That is surely a sign of the apocalypse. What is going on? Hey, the podcast studio that you see me in currently is new. It's a new space in an old place. Let's just say that. And it's very hollow. It's very echoey. And the space necessitated that I have this microphone. So we make changes, and we'll talk about that tonight. I got air conditioners rolling in there. I'm going to turn that off because I don't know how that's coming through, but that'll be another issue we can talk about in the space that you record in. So putting together a podcast studio, this is like, we did an impromptu, I don't remember what it was for, but Dave, Daniel, and I did building a podcast studio on, it wasn't a round table. We had that conversation. I posted on YouTube. So we're going to I said in that one, hey, we're going to make this a round table. That's the closing words of that one. So here it is. We're doing it. So we have podcasters. We have another podcast about podcasting guy. So that's cool. Another show you may or may not know about, but you're probably going to love it because if you watch this one, it's right up your alley. So Chris, welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you, guys. I'm honored to be here.
Audio sounds fantastic. What mic
you guys are, as I mentioned on my show, you three are on my Mount Rushmore of podcast experts.
Awesome. Yes.
All three of you.
And Chris wasn't allowed to actually be on the roundtable until he had every single one of us on his own show. I was the last domino to fall. So now he's welcome. I'm kidding. But that was awesome. I didn't even know the other guys were on the show. So that's very cool. What microphone are you using there?
This is a Sennheiser E835. It's a regular handheld dynamic. I went to the Guitar Center store with my little digital recorder, and I literally asked for like 3 or 4 mics. I plugged them all in, talked into them, recorded it, went in the corner, listened back, and this one was the highest level and nice presence, a lot more present than the SM58 for sure. So then I bought a few.
That's a killer tip, and I've mentioned that on my show before. Like, go to your local store, like a Guitar Center, and they seem to be, I'm assuming they didn't have a problem with that.
No.
And you brought your own recorder and you just rolled some digital tape and figured out what microphone. That's good because sometimes a microphone is something you can't return if they don't want you spitting all over it and then returning it. But yeah, it's a good way to find out quick. How do you sound on that microphone? And then you could get home in your space there and it sounds completely different, but it sounds good. You have drums in your studio, so we'll talk about that. And Daniel, welcome back to the roundtable.
Thank you very much. I'm Daniel J. Lewis, and my studio now looks and sounds a lot better than it did back when we had the conversation originally about building a studio. And mine is finally built out a bit more like what I've envisioned. And I'm always excited to talk about some of this stuff and even ways that you can hack it together.
Yeah, sounds nice and dead, for the lack of a better term. And we'll talk about that. How do you get that sound versus what you're hearing me on right now, which is extremely reverberant, if you want to. But I'm getting close to the microphone. I'm trying to knock that down. Dave, welcome back to the roundtable.
I'm glad to be here, learning the lesson tonight that always, if your computer has updated itself overnight, you might want to check out your software before you go. Get ready to record.
Dave is referring to the fact that he's a Smurf currently. If you're listening to the audio only version of this, I will say that we might talk about a few things that are visual. You want to see Chris rock the intro, so you should go to youtube.com/Ray Ortega just to check that out. But you can see Dave as Papa Smurf, and it's because his white balance is off and he can't get access to the manual control app of his computer. So that's what he's referring to.
Uh-huh. There we go.
No, just no.
Daniel's favorite show of all time. It's a sticker. I see that sticker in there. All right, so putting together a podcast studio, I guess we will obviously talk about our own spaces, but let's talk about, start at the very beginning. What do you need? What kind of space do you need to even record a podcast?
What I think is most important is a dedicated space.
Mm.
I understand there are many situations where you have to set up and tear down each time, and depending on what gear you have, that may be easy to do. But I think if you can have that dedicated space, whatever the size, whatever the acoustics, whatever, I think that's huge. Like for
Mhm.
me, since I'm now renting commercial space, I have a room in this office that is my video room. My camera stays set up, my lights stay set up, my props stay set up, my backdrop stays set up. That's really nice because I can go over there and record a video whenever I want. Back when I was at home, doing a video meant setting everything up all over again, especially when we were trying to sell our house, because I'd have to tear all that stuff down so our house would be show worthy. So that's my number one tip.
Yeah, and I would argue that well, a quiet space helps. Obviously, you can record a podcast anywhere. So to start off, you need gear, and it can be basic gear, an audio recorder, a phone. You don't. One of the cool things about podcasting is that it can be done anywhere by almost anyone. So you can be out in the field. So I say silence, or at least quiet, relatively quiet. But that's if you're doing a certain kind of podcast. Maybe you are interviewing a man on the street, right? And so you can be in the street, and that in that case, the sort of the environment is your studio. So for me, quiet is important. But just what you're saying there, Daniel, a dedicated space. I mean, this is the first roundtable where I don't have to send an alert to my wife to say, "Hey, recording today," and she gives me till 5:30 before she comes in, and really my daughter comes in, and all chaos breaks loose. And here they could just come home. I'm out here. This is a hashtag garage to studio. You can look that up on the social network and you can see the pictures. But I turned my detached garage into my studio. I live in California. Don't need a garage. So perfect space for it. But she could walk in, but they can just go into the house, and that really helps because I can just turn this mic on at any time and record.
But even what you had before, you had a dedicated corner.
I
You
had a
didn't
corner.
have to take your stuff down every time you finish. And that's why I'm saying is that you have, even if your dedicated space is the corner of something, it's just some place where you can leave your stuff there so that podcasting is as easy as sit down, turn on the power, press record.
Yeah. And I mean, even today, probably because I am who I am, I was setting up stuff where I was like, I'm still not at that place where you can just flip stuff on and go. And I like clean design, but I set up the lights, and that required me to I'm going to have to take down that each time because I don't want them up there. But Dave, you're not at your house anymore, but you probably started there, right? So how did that transition happen?
I started in the basement next to a water heater and
In a van by the river?
in a van down by the river. I had to walk to school both ways. Yeah, it was next to the washer and dryer as well, and a furnace. So it was very weird because I had to, and behind me I had a flush pipe. I'm not making this up. And so I literally had to time things just right to get things quiet. And I made many family members upset when they would do their laundry because I would go over and just lift the lid or, open up the dryer door and then forget to put it back in. So they come down in the morning, they're like, "Uncle Dave, my clothes are still wet." So that was fun.
So you don't have your bedroom wall plastered with the faces of your audience. They're all staring at you as you go to sleep.
No, this is actually, I have an apartment now. So this is what would have been a second bedroom, and it's not very big at all. Daniel can attest to that. I mean, you could fit a bed and a dresser in here and have a little bit of room, but I've got my desk in the middle of the room so I can get back here, and then I've got lights on the other side of it. So there's not a whole lot of wiggle room in here.
What's funny about that is you were in a rented office space for a while, and I didn't even know that a change had happened because it looks the same.
Yeah. Yep. I moved from Cleveland back to Akron, and that one was actually nice because it was a much bigger room, and the noise just like there was nothing for it to bounce off of because it was this big, long, giant rectangle. So that made life a whole lot easier. Where here, there's a little more reverb built into the room. So I'm about ready. If things were worse, I'd go and convert a closet into a studio because there's all sorts of clothes in there. That's a great place to record. If you can't have a dedicated space, your car and a closet. I've seen 3 people in about the last 2 weeks that I see pictures of them podcasting from their closet.
Yeah, I've done interviews from inside my car, and that works great. It's funny, and I've recorded like with an open closet towards all the clothes, and almost to a point, those spaces are almost too dead.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost no, it's just so flat and lifeless. I almost don't like it. So, some reverb might not be bad. Chris, you're in a big room. You have drums. What room are you in there for your studio?
This is the basement of our home. We've only been here for about a year. So before that, I actually had a commercial space for 3 years, which was so touch and go because the actual windows to my unit were single pane windows. And when the landscapers would come right outside the window, it was like loud. And luckily that rarely ever happened. And same thing with the walls. It was this office building that they put up all these little cheap walls to divide up the space to sell smaller units and stuff. I mean, paper thin walls. You could literally just talk and someone on the other side would just hear you. And luckily on pretty much every side of me, there was no one renting it. And I was like praying that no one would actually rent that space. And that was really it. Before that, I was in my house, my old apartment in New Jersey, where I recorded my first episode. I just set up the mics and went for it.
See, that's a great point, is you want to look at what's on the other side of the walls. Because I know when I lived in one place, I had one neighbor who I could basically make him mow his lawn just by pressing record. And so if I had to choose again, I would have picked a different room that was closer to the other neighbor, things of that nature. Or if you have kids and there's a playroom somewhere, you might want to find a different room, things like that. It's hard to find because your house is only so big, but if you can find a room that has nothing on all the adjoining walls.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can hear we've all recorded in less than ideal spaces. Now, Daniel, I don't think you left your house too. You're not recording in your house anymore.
Right. Yeah. I, about a year ago, switched to commercial space. And for me, I know many people might think, oh, you did that all for your podcast. No, I did that for my business because my business is so much built on audio and video recording. I needed dedicated space, especially now with the baby on the way. There would be no way to podcast after the baby's born. So I'm going to be one of those people who, when the baby's born, yes, there will be a little hiatus, but the podcast won't die because a baby comes, because I have my podcast and my business in completely separate space. But for me, it's because I was in my home all day, every day, doing business there, podcasting there, and my wife would be there all day too. It just created a lot of tension that was significantly relieved by moving all of that out. I hated to have to inconvenience my wife. Now, my wife has been my cheerleader and she's been very supportive, but I hated having to ask her, hey, could you, if you have to use the restroom, please don't flush the toilet. Don't bang around any pots or pans in the kitchen. Walk only in these areas of the house so the floor doesn't creak. I didn't like being the inconvenience like that for when I'd obsess over audio with especially with video recording.
Yeah. So we've all recorded in spaces that are less than ideal. So let's talk about, I think that's the average podcaster. We don't have dedicated places that are built for audio recording. Like if you went to NPR and they have extremely amazing setups and there's no reverb and everything sounds beautiful and no external noise is going to get in. That's not the average podcaster. So let's talk about dealing with that a little bit. Now, I mentioned how much reverb there is in the room that I'm in. I mean, I got reverb and bass buildup and all this stuff going on. The microphone is a first step in that, I think. This is a dynamic microphone. It's rejecting noise, but it makes me get really close to it because, it has a very quick drop off in its, and the polar pattern, its sensitivity drops off real quick. So just by getting close to it, I'm getting more of my voice into the microphone and less. If I backed up, it would be more of what's going around the room right now, which is a lot of sound waves. That helps. I've, all the roundtables before were always done. I handheld the ATR, and again, another dynamic microphone, and not in a good place. And just being close, the audio was actually quite good. Especially considering the space. So you can overcome a bad space fairly easily. Now, when you get close to the microphone, it can be difficult because now you're you're risking plosives and other problems, proximity effect and all that stuff. But a pop filter or a windscreen. Chris has a windscreen on there. Dave and Daniel and myself have pop filters and a little bit of mic technique. So there's usually something, you do one thing, you have to consider another. But what are some other techniques, you guys, that you've dealt with in a non-ideal space? Or what are some issues? We talked about external noise, and there is probably not a lot you can do about external noise. I also had single pane windows in my old house, and recording during the day on a Wednesday would be a joke. A helicopter goes over right now. You're going to hear that. So, right. Dave, you talked about external issues other than scheduling. What are any other issues that you've had to overcome in a sort of a home-based studio?
Well, I just know here where I'm living now, Chris was talking about landscapers. They landscape, they mow the lawn on Monday. So I just know, during this time period, I'm not going to be recording anything. Other than that, I haven't really, if you can have carpet and, any kind of curtains, things like that, that'll help break up the so it's not such a hard, flat surface for sound to bounce off of.
Yeah. And right now, I have nothing on the floor, nothing on the walls. And, the exciting part is that I'm getting a sound that is completely usable. If you're not listening to this in headphones, everyone probably heard that. Did you ever hear that tweet? I heard the tweet. I gotta work on that. There's an issue for your podcast studio. Noises you create yourself, like turning your ringer off on your phone. That's a good one. Even the vibration on your desk, that'll come through. But this space is my biggest recording challenge. Yet I'm starting off at a place where it's usable, and as I add things, it's only going to get better. Some of those things will be blankets that will come down over the doors for absorption. Panels. Daniel just built some panels, which I'm sure he'll talk about. Maybe some DIY bass traps. I've got this thing I showed on Instagram.com/podcasthelper from IKEA that attaches to the desk, and it's actually created. It's for offices, but it says reduces sound, and it's just foam. And I was going to put it up. I didn't put it up before the roundtable. But it's sort of a totality of all these things that you can do. Your schedule, your gear, the stuff you can put in your environment. Rugs is a good one, right? So, Chris, have you had challenges? You said you've been in that space for a year, but any studio you've been in, any challenges you've had to overcome?
Yeah. So I made a little list here of certain things. Like carpeting helps a lot because it absorbs the sound, and soft furniture helps too. If you have a couch or a chair or anything, or curtains, anything that's soft that can absorb sound. Also, like you said, being close to the mic, that's probably the biggest thing right there, because what you're talking about is signal to noise ratio. Your voice is the signal and the noise is the noise. And the louder your voice is, the lower the noise is. I didn't mean to rhyme there, but
well, you're the musician here, so Dave
the other thing is foam. You can use a lot of foam.
Just spray it around your room.
Yeah, those little egg crate pellet things. Just fill the whole room.
That'd be awesome.
I actually have two big pieces of foam that it's almost like the size of a big piece of plywood. And I actually have wood on one side of it, so I can actually sort of lean it up against the wall. And then when I'm not recording, I can actually sort of roll it up and put it somewhere else. So that's pretty good. The other thing is like air vents. A lot of times there's air vents in a room, and when the AC or the heat is running, when the air is running, there's that noise. What you can actually do is it's a bigger issue than just the air vents, but where you're situated in the room. So your mic is pointing a certain direction. So you can actually position where you sit in a room and make sure your mic is facing, for instance, away from an air vent. That's maybe go to the other side of the room than an air vent and point the mic away from the air vent.
Yeah, that's a good tip. No, yeah. I mean, you can even go into your room and you could just clap your hands and you can hear that the reverb is going to be different in different parts of the room. I don't know what the general advice is, but if it's, don't sit in the very middle of the room, or it's don't sit in a corner or against the wall. I forget, but it's a good point that there are even different spots within the space, the studio that you're looking to record in, that can sound very different.
Talking about the air conditioner vents, it's ideal if you can, to just turn off the air conditioner, heater, anything like that, so you don't have that making noise in the background. But one thing to think about is you might think, oh, I'll close the vent and then the air won't be blowing through, making noise. That could actually create more noise. So as much as possible, just get some room audio samples in either in different locations in the room, or your microphone pointed in different directions, or you try different things like with your air conditioner and such, to actually see which of these result in more or less noise. And then what's most important is try a sample with your voice and then realize, does anyone even hear this in the background? If they're listening in the car, if they're listening on headphones, anything like that. If they're not listening with the really big headphones, studio monitor headphones, in a perfectly acoustical environment that's dead silent, are they going to hear this noise, or does it prevent them from consuming the podcast in some way?
Yeah, and I think we're podcasters, so we develop podcasters' ear, and we hear everything. And, not everyone, most people who listen aren't podcasters, but I'm pretty sensitive to it because beyond that, I listen with earbuds most of the time. Now, I don't know if it's half or the majority or what of podcasts are consumed in the car, and you have so much more leeway, but I do produce for the person who's listening on a headphone, but it has a bias towards how I listen. So you do have to sort of remove yourself a little bit and maybe give yourself a break in some cases, right? Because what you're hearing, like not liking your own voice, a lot of other people aren't going to notice that.
And I think reverb is the bigger problem than background noise. Reverb is that echo sound that you get, and that can be more distracting and make it harder to understand what's being said. On the extreme side, the more reverb that you have, I'd say the less understandable the audio will be. I would rather hear a podcast with background noise, hiss, a fan, whatever, than a podcast with reverb.
Yeah, you were talking about the whole podcasters ear. I had somebody when I first started out, I would always talk about the sound of my fan from my computer. And I'd be like, can you hear this? I'm like, I'm trying to noise gate it out or whatever I was doing. And finally, one of my listeners said, Dave, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I wish you would move on. Because I was sitting in a quiet room like this going, oh, it's deafening. And they were like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
That's a good thing to bring up, though, because as podcasters, more than likely there's a computer in front of you. Now, I've gotten my microphone too close to the computer, and suddenly I've got like a ground loop buzz because of the interference that it's putting off. So, if you do have that buzz and it's driving you crazy, hold your mic. Make sure it's not being interfered with speakers or even your cell phone. You may need to go into like airplane mode, because when a cell phone transmits, it can introduce noise. But you're also, depending on how close your microphone is to your computer, I'm sitting in front of a big 27-inch iMac. My voice, I'm looking right into the screen because we're live streaming here into a camera, and that could cause its own reflection issues. So even the setup that you have, you need to pay attention to, because it can not only create noise, but also it can add to those reflections as well.
One of the things to consider if you're doing any kind of co-host sort of thing where someone is in the studio with you, you may have a great room for acoustics and everything, but when you add a second microphone, you're then crosstalk becomes much more of an issue, where now the other person's voice is bouncing off walls and getting into your microphone and vice versa. And that may not be a problem, but it could still create some unnecessary reverb where your microphone is picking up the other person's reverb and their microphone is picking up your reverb. And the end result is your track has more reverb than you would have expected that it would have. So that's where I think considering you do the mirror technique, which is you hold a mirror, or you could just visualize a mirror on surfaces in your room, and wherever you can see a microphone in a reflection, that's a audio reflection point as well, that you could put something there in almost anything, but put something there to dampen that or to absorb that reflection so that it doesn't make its way back into the other microphone.
Randy Cantrell in the chat, he says, remove the register from the air vent. That'll quiet it down considerably. Yeah, it would just be this big, giant, smooth whoosh, instead of like, literally, when you mentioned closing it, I have closed the vents before and ended up with like a whistle. I mean, they will whistle through that metal or whatever the material is. So something to consider. You think you're doing something good and you're actually making it worse. And yeah.
And since you're talking about removing stuff, I'll have to send you the YouTube. There's a really cool YouTube video of a guy who basically put like hooks in his ceiling that you would normally hang plants on. And then he got a moving blanket from wherever, U-Haul or whatever, and put rivets in it. And then just when it was time to record, he could hang it up, and it kind of made this little booth around him. And then when he was done, he just pulled it down. And I think my favorite tip is from the one and only Max Flight from airplanegeeks.com. He, I believe, is the guy who has his whole gear strapped to an ironing board, like with a belt. And then when it's time to record, he just drags in the ironing board, sets it up, goes to town. When he's done, it's completely portable that way.
That's
nice. Cool. And that you reminded me that, shoot, what was it before? I got just totally distracted by the ironing board.
Blankets and U-Haul?
Blankets, yeah. I mean, that same setup, I've seen, the metal, if you go into a hospital, they have the curtain that pulls around so you could put the U-shaped thing around your desk and pull the curtain. So, I mean, you can like create a studio inside of a studio if you have the ability to do that. But yeah, hanging stuff up right around you. I mean, like the infamous stories you'll hear are from like NPR people who are in a hotel on location and they still need that great sounding NPR audio, and they throw a blanket over their heads on top of the bed and they're hunched in a ball and they're recording, like a shotgun microphone. It's completely dead and quiet and it works, right? But obviously not the way you want to, probably not the position you want to be in for podcasting all the time, but there are things that you can do in a pinch or if you're in a really bad place.
And it gets hot really quick when you're talking under the blanket, but that's where the 37 pillows that they have on the bed at a hotel, you just put those around your desk and you're good to go.
And that's part of it too. We're talking about air conditionings and heaters, and Daniel was saying, shut it off. I mean, crank it up, right? The half hour before you record, you just get it really warm or really cool, shut it off and coast to the end. And, maybe the heat will actually make you shut up after like 45 minutes and you can maintain that nice, consistent time length on your podcast because you start sweating. But, even wearing I'm wearing earbuds in my ears right now as opposed to in my nose. And, having over the head, like Dave's got over the ear, he's going to be sweating by the end of this unless he's got like air blowing. But I always find myself at the end of an episode, not only are you just in a different sort of state, you're sort of worked up and you're excited and you're working. And when you're recording, after recording, I always feel, I'm like, wow, I'm sweating, man. So, but go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. One other technique before we get off the topic, as far as within a space, you can actually, like I said before, position yourself within the space. And like, for instance, you, Ray, right now, behind you, I know you're on video, so you want nice pictures and a nice wall, but what you can do is set yourself up in a position in the room where, and maybe it's even toward a corner. And so along the corner, you can put foam, and then you want to point your mic, basically have your mic pointing into the corner with you speaking into the mic, but the corner's behind you. You could put foam along that wall. So it's almost like you're acoustically treating a very small part of the room, but because of the way you have the mic pointed and to catch, because the foam will catch those reflections. And especially if you then talk close to the mic, that'll really help a lot.
Yeah. And, since we're on this topic of acoustic treatment, this is something that'd be very expensive. You could buy foam, could cost a lot of money. Daniel, you built your own. If you're on video, here's another reason to go check out the video. I'm really pushing people to get to the video. I don't know why. Just go to podcasters.roundtable.com. You can see this when Daniel's camera goes full screen, but you built your own, right?
Yeah, I've been building and still am building. I am getting a little bit obsessive with how many acoustic panels. I am maybe overdoing it on how many. I still need to hang some from the ceiling, but these panels I'm building are big. They're 2 feet by 4 feet. Most of them are. I'm going to make some smaller ones as well. 2 feet by 4 feet, using insulation on the inside, about 3 inches of insulation. And this amount of absorption would normally start at $200 per panel. Looking on Amazon or B&H, that's what professional panels like this would cost. I'm building these that the last time I did the math on this, it's looking like they'll be about $20 to $25 per panel. So when I'm finished making the 24 or so panels that I need to make, I'll be saving $4,200 at least by building it myself.
Maybe.
And yeah, I am making certain.
How much do you make an
luxury-
hour, Daniel? Because then I'm going to add this up in labor costs.
You know, so many people have said, "Wow, Daniel, you should build those and sell them." And I think about that. Well, how much is my time worth per hour? How long is it taking me to build these? No,
Also, anyone who does a DIY project, by the end of it goes, "That's my last DIY project." I don't want to do this for a living. That's for sure.
There are ways to do these panels even cheaper. Like what I'm doing, to briefly describe the construction here, I'm using MDF frames, which are actually cheaper than wood, but I have a sheet cut to the right size to make these frames. The middle is rock wool insulation, which is actually the least expensive part of the entire frame. The outside is wrapped with black speaker cloth, which is probably the most expensive part of this. The back has some little wooden frames to give it some extra stability, wood glue, screws to hold it together, staples to hold the cloth on. Some of the luxury enhancements, though, that I'm making to it is I used speaker cloth instead of burlap, which could also work. But considering the size of burlap versus the size of the speaker cloth, I think the value of the speaker cloth, even though it costs more, I'm wasting less because of its size and the layout of the panel. So some math to do there. And you can also find coupons. The luxury enhancements, two primary luxury enhancements I'm making are that I line the back of the panels with LED strip lights like you could get from Amazon, or I know IKEA sells them, but Amazon,
It's
they're much
changing the
cheaper.
color as we speak.
Man.
Yeah,
It's
so
very demonic. There's
I can change the colors to really anything I want, any kind of RGB color I want, blues, reds, greens, yellows, whites, anything like that. And that's lining the outside, the back of it. And then to help space it away from the wall farther, to not only allow it to absorb the audio better around the back of it, but also to make the lights look cooler behind it. So I get a smoother glow from the LED lights behind it. I'm using door stoppers. 3-inch gap then behind the panels, door stoppers, 4, one on each corner. Actually, that's probably the more expensive part of it. But still, even with those luxury enhancements, $20 to $25 per panel. I think if you didn't do some of the luxury enhancements that I've done, and maybe use towels, like layer several towels together and use that as the stuffing instead of insulation, I think you could probably do these for $15 per panel and still get a 2-foot by 4-foot panel, which is huge and can really block a lot of reverb for you.
Yeah. Hey, Rich in the chat, actually the YouTube chat, he asks, tax deductions for the business of podcasting, deducting for a business use of the space. Daniel, do you deduct for your space?
Oh, yeah. Because it's easy for me, because my podcast is part of my business. And my business could not exist without my podcast. And the podcast is really basically a marketing arm of my business. And I'm running the podcast like a business. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a tax person. You need to consult a lawyer, consult a tax person. But generally, if you run something like a business, then you can deduct your expenses as business expenses. But running it like a business means you have to show that you're also trying to make a profit from this as well. So your affiliates or sponsorships or donations or that kind of thing. Otherwise, I think if you're only claiming the extra income from your podcast as additional income on your tax forms, then you probably can't deduct your expenses because you're not running it like a business. You're merely running it like additional expenses. But for me, this is all business. And so everything here is deductible, which simply means I pay tax on less income.
Right. Yeah. See Gordon Firemark for further details about that. He's
and a tax professional.
Yeah. He'll send you to his buddy who's a tax lawyer and so on and so on. That's how that works. But yeah. Okay. So, we've talked a lot about, we've spent the first half talking about spaces and sort of treating the space. What are other things you need in a podcast studio? Of course, I think we've already kind of talked about it. You don't need almost any of this stuff. Have recorder will travel sort of thing. But, we're podcasters and stuff we want. We've all talked about sort of carving out a space of our own. Internet speeds are important for me because of this show. I do live video. Obviously, I don't have to do that for the podcast, but I'm fortunate enough to have enough internet to do that. Is internet speeds, uploads, downloads, is that any concern in your podcast production, you guys?
That's one of the first things I asked when I was moving was I'm not going to move someplace where I can't get decent, high speed internet. That's just not going to happen.
And we don't need it. I mean, there's nothing about producing a podcast. It just makes it easier, right?
Right. Makes it easier. And it cuts your time because the last step is upload to your media host.
Right.
And that's the part that you're like, if you're, God, if I was on dial-up, forget about it. I'd be dead.
Yeah, it depends on your workflow a lot. Like if you're doing HD video,
right,
boy, you really need a fast upload connection so you can get that stuff uploaded faster. Or if you're using like a phonic web version where you upload your uncompressed wave audio to them to process, there you need your fast upload connection. I think it's really the upload that matters most to us as podcasters.
And that's just one, again, if you don't have access to that, then you just say, I will do this, and then I will start the upload and go to bed. And then you just finish in the morning.
Right. Workarounds.
And I guess if you're having guests through Skype, or if you're bringing anyone into the podcast through the internet, then having a really high speed connection really helps a lot because he cuts down on any glitching and all that stuff.
It seems to, but Daniel, do you know what the minimums are we need? That's the thing I never quite know. Like, what are the minimum specs for your computer? What are your audio? If it's audio only, there's a big chasm between audio and video, I think. But for audio podcasting, a lot of people do use Skype to do interviews. You don't need a ton, right?
Right. Think of it this way. When we're talking about encoding an MP3 file, we talk about the compression quality in terms of kilobits per second, 64 kilobits per second or 128 or something like that. Internet connections are also measured in bits per second, not bytes, but bits per second. So if you have a 256 kilobit per second connection, then, well, do the math. You could upload or stream 256 kilobit per second audio in real time, theoretically, but that's not always the way it works. Depending on the type of connection you have, it might be something like where if you're using any more than 90% of your download or upload bandwidth, then the opposite, the download or the upload is affected. There could be other people on the network, depending on your type of connection, that could slow it down. But basically, if you have at least half a megabit up and 1 megabit down, I don't think you'll run into any problems. The more important thing is consistency and more than the speed. Because if your connection has to keep adjusting quality levels because your connection is changing in its speed, that's when you get the ups and downs of Skype and it changes the quality settings, or you get the weird effects.
Yeah. So what else do we need? I mean, again, we don't need any of this stuff, but what are some considerations when you're putting together a podcast studio?
I would say a shock mount. I know I one time battled a hum in my podcast, and it turned out that the way my desk was, you basically had the computer at the bottom of it, and then the desk was on top of it. And I didn't realize that the computer was vibrating.
The hard drive will create that noise into the arm of the microphone.
Yeah, and it went into the desk, and the arm was clamped onto the desk. And as soon as I just happened to be moving some things around and picked up the computer, and the hum went away, and I went, well, hold on a second. So yeah, I think a shock mount comes in handy. I know Chris loves it when people use a Blue Yeti and they tap on the desk. So
they type on their keyboard, which is, if you are watching the video, you may see me very cautiously looking down. Like I am typing in the chat while being very conscious of the fact that my boom arm is connected to my desk. It's connected to my shin bone and whatever. So that can go through, space might be an issue in your podcast studio. How much space do you need? Now, you said Max did it all from an ironing board. So, I've got things spread out. You got a boom arm. Is it inevitable that we upgrade our gear, or is it just because we're sort of podcasts about podcasting nerds? Is that we just want more gear? But things tend to grow, it seems like. Sell your used gear.
I think one of those most crucial pieces of gear is the mic arm, because you look at something like the ATR 2100 USB microphone. It gives you this inky dinky little stand that for most people, they have to hunch over like the Hunchback of Notre Dame in order to talk into this microphone or get close enough to use it. Similar thing with other microphones that sit on a desk. Most likely that's too far away from your voice. So a boom arm, and it doesn't have to be something fancy. You could get super cheap boom arms for $20 or so. Something like that could really be nice, because then you can position the microphone exactly where you need it. And then it's also very easy to move the microphone out of the way.
And, a lot of podcasters, live seems to be the trend these days. So Facebook and Periscope and everyone's doing live. We're doing this on Hangouts on Air, which has been moved into YouTube Live. Lighting, I'm pretty big stickler on that, but I'm a video guy. So you can have lighting at all levels, right? Chris, I think you're coming in probably like a lamp, right? Just a lamp.
I literally took a lamp from upstairs and I just stuck it behind my computer. Yeah.
And that's the key, is that, and here's the thing, if you join us on the roundtable, you will at some point if you're watching this, I hope, podcastersroundtable.com/guest. That's where you sign up to be on the roundtable. If you join us, one of the things I will say in my email is shine some light on your face. I literally say that. Shine some light on your face, use the best microphone you have available. That's the instructions you'll get for the roundtable. And it can be as simple as putting a light in front of your face. There are cheap LEDs these days. I have a big softbox that's coming in from this side and some fill light over here with an LED. I, for the roundtable, a lot of times would sit in front of a giant window, and I love window light. The thing is, with window light, it changes. So you may have to invest in some lights. You can use what you have. Light is still just light. It's all how you treat it. If you put a big sheet in front of really just one light bulb, you'll get that nice big softbox that costs a lot of money, but it's harder to set up. So a softbox might just make it easier to take down and put up and stuff like that. But, Daniel, you have some LED lights, you have some CFLs. Dave, what are you coming in? Well, we know your color's off, but you have lights, right?
Yeah, I have basically CFLs.
CFLs. And that's cheap. You can get like $100 kit, right? For a softbox or something. You have a softbox? Is that?
Yeah, it's basically
umbrella.
Yeah, it's basically a big, I'll just turn around here. You can kind of see them there.
Yeah, exactly.
Big old softbox.
Even if nothing else, just go to the store or wherever and get some daylight color light bulbs, whether LEDs or CFLs, and put those in some lamps in front of you. And I recommend daylight because it's a much cleaner light and will end up looking a lot nicer, and it's easy to work with. And that can look really nice, even if it's just you line some lamps up on your desk and you plug in these little daylight bulbs into it. That can look a lot nicer than relying on your regular room lighting.
Yeah, the key with light is that you're using it. Like cameras like light. Photography, video, it wants light. So, people ask all the time, hey, Ray, how do you get the look on your camera? Well, I have a decent camera. Starting with nice gear helps, but the C920 you can get on sale for $60. It's under $100, so the camera's nice. But then it's about just knowing a little bit about light. But just set up some lights and move them around and see what looks good. So lighting doesn't have to be expensive or difficult. You just need to use it if you want to look better. If you're doing video, or whether that's a video podcast or you're doing live streaming your audio podcast the way we're doing right here. Chris, you were reaching for stuff. Did you?
No, the bat phone rang, and I usually have it off. I usually tell all my clients to I never let people call me in the studio. I always want to get their phone number, and then I call them, because waiting for someone to call and then you don't even have their contact info, that's like a horrible position to be in.
I don't even know how to use the phone. Like, you dial a series of numbers and people answer. Is that how that works? Send me a text message. I'm making bad phone jokes, but
yeah.
Cool. So what else, as we are, I still got some good time here. So what else do we want to know about when we're putting together a studio?
I think regardless of your environment, whether it's the ideal studio-like environment or it's your kitchen or your basement or something, I think technique is the most important thing. You can record in horrible circumstances, and if you have the right technique, you can make up for the weaknesses in your environment. Technique like getting close enough to the microphone, about 4 to 6 inches away, or what is that, 20 to 30 centimeters, I think, away from the microphone. Point the microphone at your mouth from a slight angle so that you're not blowing your peas and other pops like that directly into the microphone. Use a microphone that has the cardioid pattern and make sure it's pointing at you, not at something creating noise. Turn off noise stuff. Most of the things that we'll see make the difference is in how we use the tools, not so much the tools themselves. It's like Da Vinci could have probably created amazing works of art with cheap paintbrushes from Walmart. It's not the paintbrush that made the artist, it's the skill that made the artist.
Some other things you might consider, especially if you have kids, is if you can come up with a regular schedule where, hey, mommy, daddy is going to go into this room for an hour every Tuesday. And if you guys are good, you get candy or an apple or something that's healthy or things like that. Or on-air lights are kind of expensive depending on where you look. So if you can, hang a tie or whatever you want, some sort of signal that,
hang a sock on the doorknob.
Yeah, something that says so you're not in the middle of it. And so if they know that there's a sock on the door, don't come knocking, or however that works.
So disturbing. And I think communication is key there, right? And setting time aside, not only can keep your podcast on a consistent basis, Dave's going to make me laugh here, but you can, people that you have to work around your life typically, especially if you're podcasting from your home. It usually doesn't involve just yourself. So, and again, having time carved out to be in the studio is one of those things that can help you stay consistent. So that's actually a good tip.
Are we going to touch on any post-production or anything like that?
Yeah, maybe.
Because
part about that. What's the question?
Part of having a space and a studio is you can literally, for instance, if you do have an air vent that's blowing air, because like I know, Daniel, you said you can turn it off. Actually, in my house, I don't know why, even when we turn off the heat and the AC, because there's 3 stories. Every now and then the air comes on just to circulate the air, and I can't turn it off. Actually, my parents visited. I just realized this. My dad did find a little switch on the actual HVAC unit that literally turns it off. I forgot about that. But anyway, if there's certain noise that happens in your studio, even if it is subtle, if it's always the same noise, there's things you can do in post-production to just get rid of that noise, which is handy.
Yeah, you can rehab. I mean, the way we're talking about rehabbing space, there are things to do. I like to make those last resort things, but there are software that can help you, definitely, if you are in a challenging space. Reverb's a little harder, but there's some plugins. It's really, they're difficult, but there is definitely some post-production techniques we can talk about at the end here that can help with that. One other thing I did want to revisit, Dan, you talked about being in studio with multiple people. You have recorded with people in your studio there. You have co-host before. And how about even the bleed from one mic to another, right? I'm assuming you use another dynamic mic, but do you have to make any considerations for other open microphones? Now, you may have a gate. That may be one of the things. So how do you deal with, I'm talking into my microphone and I don't want it to bleed into the microphone of the person who's sitting right across the table from me?
Well, it's 3 techniques. The first is having the microphones pointing away from each other.
In a way, you mean in the rejection pattern of the microphone, right?
Right, so that if my voice hits the other microphone directly, it's hitting the back of the microphone. These are, and you can get this even with some condenser microphones, but a good condenser microphone costs a lot more than a good dynamic microphone. But anything that, if the microphone is directional, my voice is hitting the backside where it rejects more of that sound. So that's one important thing. The second thing is looking at those reflection points, trying to ensure that my voice doesn't bounce off of nearby surfaces back over to the other microphone. And the third thing is, if possible, either use a gate, which I do use a hardware compressor limiter gate, so it closes the gate for the other microphone when the audio level hitting it is below a certain threshold. Tweaking that without destroying the voice can be a little difficult. But what you could do as an alternative is, if you record in multitrack, which, hey, the audacitytopodcast.com/why multitrack, latest episode I published talking about why you should do multitrack, and the next episode will be about how to do multitrack. But anyway, if you record in multitrack, then you have your voice on one track, your other person's voice on the other track, then you can go in and do some custom tweaking to silence their track, or maybe a process on their audio to clean it up so it doesn't have any of that crossover.
Or you checkerboard it, which is something I do, which is I literally remove the track when that person's not speaking. Although you can run into some issues where if you have two people speaking at the same time, now you've got to add that back in, and you can notice that difference. So in some of these things, I think this goes back to Dave's point about what we hear versus what the audience hears. You have to be careful because, again, I think it's high intensity health, which YouTube channel, I guess, and the YouTube chat says a big mistake newbies make is minimizing minimizing the background noise. I'm not speaking well, but which is the first tip when you get in your studio, learn how to speak. But people go too far with these things, right? And Daniel, you hinted on there with the noise gate where it's going to start cutting off syllables if you don't know how to set that right. But even noise removal, you'll try to compensate for that noise that you hear. And now you've got this underwater warbled sound. So, and I think this is a thing that almost all podcasters do who try to do noise removal in the beginning. So, or even removing, like I'm talking about removing sound. If you have a noise floor that's high enough in your studio, and then you remove that sound when the other person's not talking, and then you add it back in when they are, it's more distracting for me to hear the noise come and go than to just leave it.
Yeah.
Right. I agree. And the other, as important as all those three that you mentioned, Daniel, is being close to the microphones. I mean, literally, look, if you're a podcaster and you learn a little bit about mic technique, to stay close to your mic. In fact, I'm actually a little further away than I prefer to this mic right now. And this isn't the mic I normally use because I'm not used to doing video, and this is like all strange for me. But having people who don't know that, having them be really close to the mic, that really just helps everything you mentioned, Daniel, and makes the noise floor even lower because the voice is louder. And that's the separation between the noise and your voice. That's like just the most important thing.
Yeah, and I've often referred to the second use of a pop filter is for training wheels for newbies, right? So, but it can be a guide to help someone stay on the microphone. You say, hey, just stay on, so you set the pop filter at a certain distance that's safe, and you say, hey, just stay right on top of this pop filter, and it'll put them at the right spot. Another important thing about that in studio is monitoring your own audio. I find a lot of people, they don't want to hear it, but you'll know when you get off microphone like this and I'm coming back, I'm like, wait, where did my voice go? And because you're going to get lost in thought. You're recording a podcast. You're thinking about content, not technique, but Dude, you can hear the problems.
You just lean back probably 6 or 8 inches and your voice literally almost disappeared. I mean, that's how important speaking into the mic is.
Exactly.
Well, and when you're monitoring, that's when you didn't realize it before, but now you do. That when you have your squeaky chair, the squeaky chair is making it into the mic. And if you don't have your headphones on, you're thinking, oh, that's probably not going to get picked up.
Yeah. I mean, part of that, catching the problems before they happen is part of the key, right? You don't want to get in post-production. It's great to have the tools to help you when there are things that make it in that you can't avoid. But if you avoid them in the beginning, you're going to have a much better podcast. And the space, again, you can sort of set up your space to help reduce those things. It says, someone says in the chat, you guys talk about interfaces versus mixers versus portable recorders and how much of a difference any of it makes. So, it's hard to separate a podcast studio from the gear that fills it. But, on this one here, I mean, USB mic is the way you usually hear me on the roundtable. This is coming in through an audio interface. There's a mixer over there. It's not even plugged in. Would allow me to do a few more things like a mix minus and stuff. But really, you just need to get your microphone in, and it depends on what you need, right? So for a mixer, I might need that if I have multiple people in studio, because if I used my audio interface, Skype would only hear the left side and I couldn't get 2 microphones in. So with gear, it always depends, and you always have to ask yourself, what are you doing? I think there are people who just buy these packages and then they have like these massive mixers with 16 channels. They use one when they could have used a Focusrite 2i2 for a fraction of the price. What do you guys think? I mean, and portable recorders, all that stuff. I mean, I don't think that's just how you get it done. But you can get it done whether it's into software or a recorder. It's not going to affect quality, in my opinion. Obviously, you can buy different types of gear, right? You can buy a garbage mixer with a terrible preamp versus another mixer that has a good preamp, and that's going to create its own issues. But, a recorder versus going into software, it's not going to make your audio any better.
It's really about features, and you're giving yourself the tools to do cool things. And do you need that tool? Do you need to do that cool thing? Or is it just one of those, oh, it'd be really nice to have a mixer when you don't actually need it? You might only need that interface.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here with a mixer that has 6 different XLRs, and I'm using 1. And the most I've ever used was 2. So it's ridiculous. I was doing a thing for a while where I was taking phone calls and I had a co-host and everything like that, but I need to swap this out because it's taking up half my desk and I'm not using it.
I'm in a similar place. And in fact, we have the same mixer. It's the Behringer X1832 USB. It has 6 XLR inputs. There was a time when I was using 5 of those XLR inputs, and all of the other stereo inputs I am still using right now. I'm using all of the outputs on it. The sub, the alt outputs, the main outputs, the FX, the auxiliary. I'm using all of that, but the inputs, now I only use 2 XLR inputs on it. I needed all of those features when I got this mixer.
Yeah, going backwards a little bit, talking about download speeds, that seemed to be, people were interested in that one, upload, download, Skype interview, stuff like that. Chris Davis in the chat makes an important point that using hardwire in is an important thing. So regardless of what speeds you have, again, how do you use it, right? So with a Skype interview, what I'm saying is being hardwired via Ethernet to your Skype connection, so you're not at the mercy of Wi-Fi. Doing all these things to help your space be the space you need it to be. So shutting down iTunes, something that's a resource-heavy app that's going to suck resources from your computer away from Skype. These are things you can do. These are more sort of knowing how to rehab the problems you have. So you have a slow internet connection, get that, make sure that you are plugged in, whether it's slow or fast, really.
Great point.
I'm not so sure that's as much an issue anymore with the
You don't think so?
advancement of Wi-Fi technologies. Especially now, you look at a lot of these computers and they don't have a way to hardwire into the internet.
If you don't have one. If you do have one though, wouldn't you just by default, wouldn't you just rather be plugged in?
Oh yeah, I would, but when I've been on Wi-Fi, good Wi-Fi, that is, like it's either in or it's AC, and I know newer standards are coming out too. I haven't noticed really any problems with consistency of the connection. It's really about the connection itself.
Yeah.
Now, your results may vary, and it depends greatly on your devices that you're using, the reliability of your router and such.
Okay, just close iTunes then. I mean, is there truth to that, Daniel? I mean, about the resources and giving yourself the best chance.
Yeah, and a problem I have is I have 2 backups that run on a regular basis on my computer. I've got Time Machine, which is a local backup, and I have Backblaze, which is an online backup. And when either of these run, they spike the CPU enough that if I'm also live streaming at the same time, my computer fan starts revving up and gets significantly louder. So I have to either disconnect the USB drive so that the local backup doesn't run, or close those backup programs so that nothing is running automatically while I'm podcasting, because it may not be noticeable when I'm doing normal work, but while doing the resource intensive stuff of a Skype call or live streaming or anything like that, 2% more could push my fan over that limit where it needs to start revving up and getting louder in the background, or slowing down things. I did a webinar for Podcasters Society about a year ago, and a great webinar. And we were so engaged in this conversation that I didn't look at the chat room to see that everyone on chat was saying, oh, we can't hear you. You keep cutting out. And it was because my backup started and it was hogging too much CPU, taking resources away from the live stream, which then was giving the live stream really bad audio and clipping out, and just making that preventative decision beforehand would have prevented that.
Yeah, I mean, your space, again, your studio, all these things that can cause hiss. And I think I did a series of blog posts on this, including like a CFL light could get in his buzz. There's all these things that can make noise in your environment that at the end of the recording, the result is hiss. Like there's noise in my audio. It may sound like a fan, or it may sound like a lawnmower or something else, but in the end, it's like I've got background noise. But computer fans, with the Podcaster Studio, I don't even turn on the computer because I don't use notes or anything like that or write them down. I eliminate that. So it's a solo show by myself. I'm just speaking to a microphone. I'm going to go direct to a recorder. I'm just removing any of the potential things that can cause noise because, again, I'm picky about that in that situation. But being too close. I mean, if you have a tower, some people have put the tower in the closet because if it is just a loud noise, or maybe you can even shield that with foam, something that may create noise. So you may have other things in the room, like I said, lighting or computer fans, hard drives inside a computer. As we move to SSD, it's not as big of a deal. I know the new MacBooks have like SSDs in them or something, or one of them do, and that was kind of exciting because you're like, oh, I could have my computer right underneath my microphone, which is the way a lot of people record. And when you start running things like recording software or streaming software, those fans, especially on a Mac, man, mine have always gone crazy. That's why I always just shut it down. But in this case here, I have to live with a computer. I need it for the streaming. And, get the microphone a little further away from it. Again, it's all about setting it up properly. It's not necessarily like, oh, there's a new piece of gear you can buy to eliminate that. A gate does help in that situation, but not when you're talking. So consider how even you can move the gear you have around to make your space more conducive to recording your show.
Yeah, and in some cases, if you have a buzz, it might be the lighting. I know if you have fluorescent lights because you're in the basement, I've seen those in some cases cause a problem. So if you're troubleshooting a weird problem, that might be one where you just go over and turn off the lights and see if that fixes it.
Yeah, and this person, let's see, Paula in the chat was saying that it's great to have a pre-show to test levels. So, I mean, I'm always, even if I'm recording in the same place, each time I'm going to do testing. I'm going to fire up the microphone in the recorder. I'm going to hear what it sounds like. And again, it's all about dealing with those problems ahead of time. I think it will save you a lot of headache. People are asking also about stereo versus mono, but maybe that's another conversation. We could get down a really far rat hole on that one. Yeah, you're going to find opinions. The guy right next to you is going to disagree.
I know. And then we'll talk about the election after that. So
perfect. Nice. This is a roundtable. It is a roundtable here. Which I redesigned this is a new studio. I got a new desk. It's a stand-up desk. And I think I put a picture of it out there on Facebook or Instagram or something. And someone said they were surprised to see it was not a round table. I didn't even think about that.
It has rounded corners.
It does. It's virtual. This is a virtual.
Or should I say border radius? It has border radius for all the web
sounds
design.
It sounds very Photoshop speak there. Any other considerations with your space? I mean, I'm looking around the studio and thinking, well, what are some of the things that I considered when I converted a garage? Obviously, insulating this was a help, and I chose to put big giant doors. I have a garage door that's now replaced with there was always carriage doors. Those are the weak spots for noise for me. But part of this is it's an office I work in every day. I work from home, so I also care about the space being comfortable to be in, somewhere I enjoy to be every day. So I think there's also a compromise between being comfortable in your space. This is a stand-up desk. I could stand up. I'm finding myself very comfortable standing up. I'm not doing it right now, but I've even heard tips of standing up to help you project or have more energy in the studio. So even the way you approach it physically could be something that improves your podcast.
Certainly. It's a performance, usually.
One of the things when you were talking about insulation that I thought of is if you're working with a basement, maybe the best kind of acoustics that you could get would be go ahead and frame and add insulation to that basement, but then don't add drywall, because then with the insulation on the walls, that could be essentially a solid wall of acoustic panel.
Oh yeah. So I did recordings at every stage of this studio, and that'll come out later as I put together like a final piece that shows the transition. But when it was open walls and just insulation, I ran in here to record, and it was so dead in here that it almost hurt. You know, if you've been to like a show, like a rock show, and then you come out and you're in your room and it's so quiet it almost hurts. It was amazing, and I was like, oh, I kind of wish I could record like this, but you know, wiping the fiberglass out of my eyes during the recording would probably be probably get annoying. But yes, I mean, that would be, you know, if you could use something that is, if something allows you to leave it open, and you could leave it open, you don't care about the aesthetics, it would work fantastic. I can definitely attest to that.
And then some other things, if you're going to have, you know, we talked about if you can have it be a constant, you know, we'd have to rip it down. If you do have to rip it down, do yourself a favor, take a picture of your mixer before you move it.
Yeah.
That way, when, you know, the little ones have come in and turned every knob that there is to turn, you have something that you can fall back on and see exactly where your knobs work. That you will thank yourself later for doing that.
Yeah,
and
it's
the
a great tip.
wiring. Take pictures of your wiring too.
Yeah, I label all my channels so I know that this one is the iPad, this one is that. I took what were address labels and just stuck them on the mixer and then just wrote with a Sharpie whatever it was. And that way, if I ever want to pull it off, I can. I've done that. I label the cables so I can see. So because they're all, you know, black or whatever color it is. And so if you put little stickers on those, then you know, okay, this is Laura's mic, this is Steve's, this is Wendy's. Just makes life a whole lot easier than going, wait a minute, can you tap your mic? Can you? No, not the. So just those little things can save you from going crazy.
Yeah, I actually kept pretty good notes about how I connected things. Like I also label cables and stuff like that, but I would also just write down like what sends are going where the inserts are going. And then I would write it all down. And then especially when I was like zeroing the gear and doing the levels on the recorder, like I would note where the levels were and everything. So the more you can write down about all that stuff, the better, because trust me, once it gets a little involved and confusing, you will forget. And then you don't want to be sitting there looking at a pile of cables and equipment and saying, wow, here we go again.
Yeah, it's
like
an important
Christmas lights.
Yeah. Yeah. What? Yeah, it's an important note because a lot of podcast studios, I think, have to be set up and torn down every time, right? I mean, we're talking about podcast studios, but a lot of people set up their stuff, record, and then they break it back down because it's in their bedroom or something. I've certainly done that more than once, I believe. And like I said, I mean, I've even gone out to the car for an interview when I knew, and I did that on Wi-Fi, but I recorded, you know, one thing that you can do here's the thing. If you have Skype and it's not very good, whether it's because you have slow internet or because the connection just seems to always be bad, of course you could try an alternative like Google Hangouts or something. But, you know, if you can get the other person to record their side, a double ender, not always convenient, but it exists. And then Skype only exists, or the phone only exists for you guys to communicate. And you're recording your side and they're recording their side, and you sync it in post-production. And that, you know, that can make it sound like this is probably actually more, it's probably more of the case and easier to do when you have a co-host, someone who's going to be on your show every week, and you guys can really work together. It's like, okay, you have a good microphone and recording setup. I do too. Let's record our own audio, put it in Dropbox, and we'll sync it up. So it's harder to ask a guest that, but I guess, you know, there are things like Ringer. There are apps out there, right? On your mobile phone, Ringer does a sort of double ender via phone where you don't have to know how to do those things. That can help, although I think you have to download an app. So there are again, I think the theme for the evening is like, no matter what the challenges of your podcast studio, there's something you can do. It may take more time. It may be harder to do. It may be less convenient. But there is stuff you can do to work around the issues of not recording in an ideal studio.
And I think the focus always needs to be on the content, the message you want to share. Yes, the audio quality may have.
But my content is about the studio. What do I do, Daniel? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, for we who podcast about podcasting, I think we are and should be held to a higher standard. So if you're listening to a podcast about podcasting and they have horrible audio on a consistent basis, then maybe listen to one of the others. But for most people, they care most about the message, not so much about the pristineness of the audio quality. Now, really bad audio quality, yeah, will make it very difficult to listen.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be perfect like Ray's audio or Dave's or Chris's.
It doesn't. You're right. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think we're in a different time. We're in early on, 8 years ago, 5 years ago. It was more normal. People didn't know what good audio is. But now we've got people entering the space who are producing super high quality audio. And when you listen, and a lot of people listen to an NPR show, and then they hear your show and they're like, whoa. I mean, I'm surprised by the increase in number of, a number of reviews that I've seen on shows that the top 10 reviews are like, I can't listen to this. Like, it's terrible. Like, it's, and they're talking about the noise in the audio. And they're even, I'm seeing normal people give like post-production tips, use some noise removal or like shut the door. I'm like, wow, this is a change. And so while I agree, man, you will kill yourself over trying to be perfect. And I oftentimes spend too much time myself trying to get that super clean audio. That's just for me. So you do have to walk the line. But, I think that standards have risen a bit and listeners are more likely to know. You talked about reverb, Daniel, whereas that's like the number one thing. And people will know. And if you're far away from your microphone, people are more likely these days to pick up something like that because not only the reverb, but you just sound distant, right? And compared to a podcast where someone's on the microphone and they sound present, people will notice that. So there's a fine line. Don't kill yourself over trying to do too good. I mean, try to get crazy about perfection. But if you're aware of all of these issues, again, you've seen things you can do.
Yeah, there comes a point where the money that you spend on the new equipment, let's say I went from a high LPR 40 to an Electro Voice RE320. There's going to be a slight difference. And really, if it's better or worse is really an opinion. So most times, unless you're going from a really horrible mic to a really good mic, the difference is really, really subtle. And I think that's where, as podcasters, we, again, in our quiet room, smashing our headphones into our head, trying to see what the difference is. I don't think the average listener is going to really care about that.
Yeah, in terms of this conversation about building a studio and everything, I agree with all of you. You just want to avoid the major mistakes, avoid the major stuff, and a little bit of noise is not going to kill anybody. Yeah.
One of the things I would recommend too, we're talking about testing mic technique and things like that, and testing this. When you do those tests, explain what you're doing. I'm talking directly into the microphone. Now I'm talking across it. This is recorded in front of the window. This one's, and just that way, when you listen back, you can go, I think number 4 was the best one. And then you can hear what you did. Oh, this is the one with the main knob is at 12 o'clock. This is at the 3 o'clock and the bass is at 4. Then you can go back and say, okay, I need to set my knobs like that to get that setting.
So what Dave is telling you is do that and then start a podcast. I mean, do like 8 months of testing.
Yeah.
And make sure that you get it right. Because Dave will tell you, I mean, people will do this, right? They will try to have the perfect space. They'll have to try to have the perfect audio. They'll do those tests. It's very important. You have to do the test. You have to put the work in. It doesn't just happen magically. Or some people will tell you, you only need your phone. That's fine. Did you start a podcast? Good. Now grow, right? Do those tests. But start publishing. Get your stuff out there. Don't freak out. Awesome. Well, I think we're probably going to start repeating ourselves. So it's a good time to head out. And actually, my body is telling me this thing is about over. The air is off, and I am getting sweaty. Sweat stains. This is video, so I got to get out of here before my shirt is soaked. There's no air moving. So it's a good tip. Shut the air off. It'll stop you from babbling too long. I want to thank everybody. Anything else you want to add at the end, that is fine. But let us know where we can find your podcast, and we will head on out. Dave, co-host extraordinaire, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me as always. You can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com. Use the coupon code LISTENER, and you'll save if you feel like signing up.
Awesome. And Daniel, co-host extraordinaire squared, thank you so much for joining us.
In everything you're doing, when we're talking about audio quality and studio and stuff, please don't obsess over the technology. Please don't let that prevent you from sharing your message with the world. You have something to share. So let the technology just enable that, not focus on the technology. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitytopodcast.com.
Awesome. But seriously, don't mess it up. All right. Hey, and Chris, thanks for joining us on your first roundtable. Thanks for our drum. I should have you play us out, but it involves him running backwards and stuff, so I won't do that. But Chris, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. Again, you three are on my Mount Rushmore of podcast experts. And so my show, the one that's relevant to podcasters, is called the Podcast Engineering Show, which focuses a lot more on the audio engineering side of it. It is for people who do want to obsess a little and kind of get into that, or even start a business producing shows for other people, that kind of thing. So yeah, the Podcast Engineering Show. Thank you guys.
Awesome. That is this audience. You're speaking to the right people. We're the people who want to dig in, tweak, try something else, and hear about building podcast studios.
Yeah, when Dave was talking about telling what you're doing in the mic, I just pictured myself like with some of my mics. I'll be like, okay, this is with 200 hertz boosted 2.5 dB. This is boosted 2 3/4 dB. This is 3 1/4 dB. Like, you can get nutty, but sometimes we love it.
We do love it. That's it. This is our hobby, and sometimes that hobby extends into a business or whatever. It's just a passion, but and that's the key. I think if you're gonna do a show about podcasting, you should have that level of interest, right? That's good for us. Maybe not so good for other people, but those are great ways to you definitely have to try out your gear and try different things. And I'm always pushing people to experiment. Like, make sure you really want to know the difference and what's wrong. Like, you actually want to find out what's wrong. Like, take that low end and just crank it up, and then hear what muddy sounds like, so that you can pick it off. So anyways, we won't get too farther into that. Again, I'm gonna turn the heater on to really get me out of here. All right, Podcasters Roundtable 81 in 2 weeks. We will see you then. Podcastersroundtable.com/live if you want to join us in the chat in real time. Otherwise, podcastersroundtable.com in your favorite place to get podcasts. Hey, if you're still listening, you like it enough to review, right? Go ahead, toss us a review. This is the proper place for that call to action. I'm just saying. All right, wave goodbye, everybody. We're out.
Thanks.